So I wanted to talk about Belle, which I went to see yesterday and I thoroughly enjoyed. It was very slow. It is a drama, so for those of you who are into, action, action, fast, fast, you wouldn't have enjoyed it. You probably would have actually fallen asleep. And that's the first thing that you notice, that, the other theaters were sold out. All the other movies. It was a Saturday afternoon. But we were actually just 4 people in to see Belle, so that just tells you. So, as many people may have suggested, Belle is a love story. That's one of the undercurrents that follows through the movie. And of course, through that, you get to see Belle's decision to have a love marriage. You see the constraints of on marriage and money and power, and how that was meted out differently on different people's bodies. Of course, obviously, you see skin colors being one of those ways that those differences come to bear. But then, as Belle's sister points out in the film, as Belle's cousin sister points out in the film, womanhood in general was owned. They were property of men, and they had to barter. Elizabeth had to barter her status, her birthright, to gain the hand of a man who would take care of her financially. And so that was an arranged marriage. And so when we look at the extent to which we invest our patriarchal thinking into marriage, that we think that we have a sort of freedom in what we think is love marriage, but so much of that is invested in and even symbolized in the wedding of a woman going from her father's home, betrothed to this man who will take care of her. Symbolically, she has no power. She's owned hand to hand. And so that's interesting because on the other side, this movie takes place in the late 1700s. So there was clearly slavery here on this land, to the extent that at one point Belle has to ask, her family, is this person serving us a slave? Which is very interesting. I'll get back to that. But as far as looking at the women and across races being owned by men, think about this. This is a period where there's slavery. And part of how the complications around how Belle is integrated into that family and that household is that she's a descendant of a slave. Partially, half. We'll get back to that. But you don't see slavery in the film. You don't see slavery. You don't see any chains. You don't see any boats. You don't see any, they talk about it a lot because it becomes one of the central ethical issues of the story. That's the sort of triumph of the story. That's the victory that's celebrated at the end, and then it's, capped by the love story, just like every other Hollywood movie. So in that form, it is a classic Hollywood story being told. But you don't see slavery at once, and you don't see slavery so much. They avoid showing any, aspects of slavery so much that, again, when Belle asks if this, maid servant of their family is a slave, she doesn't even know. And of course, it's confirmed that even this black person is not a slave. So again, you don't see slavery in this time of slavery. And so you begin to see how the cloak of civility can be sustained, the little lies that people have to tell themselves in order to sustain slavery. And that's what's so interesting about the decay of slavery, is that it's not just a moral and physical, harm on the actual slave, but looking at what it does to the enslaver, and just looking at all the the lies that one would have to tell themselves in order to sustain this radical system. To say that we don't benefit from white skin privilege is to tell yourself a lie. At that time, I'm not saying it is today. Well, actually, I am. But that's really the challenge: is how were they to know that the system was so horrible if you could actually be? And this is the kicker of the movie. Around this dark-skinned woman who's in this family. It's not just that she's in this family. She is the niece of the actual judge who is overseeing, the case that slavery is hinging upon. Our slaves' property, our slaves, can you insure slaves? The actual details of the very famous, I think it was Zozo case. In the movie version, it is. So the slave ship, where just like we've seen in, for example, Armageddon. Oh my God, it's not Armageddon. What's this? The movie about the slave ship? It'll come to me. Armistead. You know, where the slaves were in such bad shape that they just threw them over and lighten the load, you know, for 100 different reasons. But then it would be more advantageous to them in the capitalist system to get the insurance from throwing it over. So, you know, here is Belle calling it fraud with her critical thinking of the situation, having no training, having been sheltered from the lived conditions of slavery her whole life. That we're, you know, it is quite unbelievable that you can have this full-grown woman who's thinking about getting married and who's colored, and she doesn't even realize the conditions of slavery around her so intimately that she doesn't even know if her own maid working next to her is a slave. So intimately that that maid hasn't even taught her how to comb her nappy head. Her whole life she doesn't even know. She's that insulated from black people that not a single black person has been close enough to her to say, sweetheart, you have to start from the ends. Quite opposite of European hair. So intimate was her insulation, her distance that they had kept over, so cloaked for her whole life. And that was an actual descendant of slaves. So imagine the people who weren't actual descendants of slaves, who were even benefiting from the system of slavery. How cloaked was their everyday reality from the actual world, even that's just happening right over that wall? How many lies and how many lies did they have to continually tell and craft with and amongst each other? You know, we see some of that. We see, you know, in the opening scene, that also happens to be, I mean, I think the first almost 10 minutes of the movie were actual the clips that have been circulating around the previews. That was kind of boring. And there's one key scene, and I'll get to that. But you see the aunt and uncle discussing how they're going to bring this woman, this little girl, into their house. And fortunately, you see that they agree that, you know, ultimately she's our blood. You have to take care of her. But how to do that, they contemplate calling her just the servant of the, you know, maid servant of the cousin that they have to, the other niece that they have to take care of, because they're at war. Ultimately, they're an empire. The fathers are off taken, you know, snatched away from the homes, talk about family values, and sent out to build the empire upon which these people are able to actually be there in such a stately manner. And to preside over a course and tell people what the values should be. It's the wife, that conversation between the wife and husband, you see this, they have to tell each other little lies. And in such a nuanced way, they can't even have between them an open discussion about it. It's so stiff and upper lip that even between a husband and wife, they can't openly discuss the conventions of slavery that they are chained to. That's how intimate they were, chained to slavery. So you're asked, you know, through this whole movie, no one says it really directly except for the Reverend son, until, you know, he has to, like, you know, get out ethnic and call the guy out when he walks out and gets fired from being his apprentice. That isn't it ironic that you can even question whether or not slaves are cargo or human when your own bloodline is half slave? That you know that you love and covet this girl and have loved her as your daughter, as you said, as if she were from your own loins. You have loved her. And yet you can compartmentalize your thinking, deny that she even exists as soon as you put on your suit and go into the workplace. And we all, you know, we saw that transition that he made, how he sustained that at breakfast. They were very attentive in showing how the breakfast was the father's symbolic withdrawal from what was going on in the family. The reality of the color line really doesn't exist because, well, here we are at this table in this stately manner, in this high status family. And here we are front to front with slavery. Now, what's interesting is you're confronted with all the different nuances of people love her and loathe her, people envy her, and ultimately envy her because she has money. You see the weight of one's womanhood versus the weight of one's money between the two cousins trying to find husbands. But I'll close on this. The scene opens with the movie opens with the father of Belle giving her a piece of chocolate, dark chocolate, luring her saying, this is our peace offering between you, and I promise you, with the weight of this chocolate, you will be taken care of. You know, he translated from a little girl growing up in some cave, it looked like, to, if you had to translate what the experience that was ahead of her would be like, here it is embedded in this piece of chocolate. Their entire empire, the sugar in that chocolate, the chocolate beans, the cocoa beans itself, the cocoa beans from West Africa, the sugar from the West Indies, the hands to do that in this transatlantic trade, all embedded in that one piece of chocolate. He said, here, this is yours. And she ate that chocolate, and she went with him, and she lived a life. And it was only when she said, no, I'm not going to deny that chocolate in me. You know, she wouldn't marry that wealthy guy, that wealthy alliance, family, arranged marriage that had been predicted for her, because they wanted to deny her chocolate. We'll forgive it. We'll forgive that you are, that side of you, and anyway, you're cultured, and so you're not really black. She said, no, I wouldn't want to be in a family that would be ashamed of me, that would simply tolerate me. And so, of course, the love story ends with the different pieces of their reality coming together, the not wanting to be with someone who would deny her, but her also not denying that in herself. So the movie ends with her being whole. In the film, everyone being whole from the different fragments. The uncle deciding that, I'm whole. That life that I lead, those values that I have at home, should also be reflected and be consistent with who I am here. He's whole. The Reverend son and Belle, they're made whole. Belle's sister cousin, Elizabeth, who has to marry, she's made whole by recognizing, her position in the society and not sort of giving into the colonized thinking of she's actually gaining something, but she understands the negotiation the compromises that she must make with her own body just to live in this society, and that, in a sense, makes her whole. And so the movie ended on a good note. Go see it.